Hi there. Today, we're going to talk about going from a setback to a comeback. Yes, and we're going to share insights and experiences on navigating life transitions, which are natural and normal. This conversation is designed specifically if you are a high achieving midlife woman leader, executive, or entrepreneur, and you're facing some major personal and professional changes, because we want to explore together some of those and how you can turn them into powerful comebacks. For those of you I haven't met yet, I'm Dr. Geneva, founder of Dr. Geneva Speaks, and I help women who are in their 50s, that midlife, elevate from feeling stuck and uncertain to becoming confident creators of a vibrant life, where each chapter is better than the last. So, for us to have that vibrant life, to be women in leadership roles, to be women who can navigate those personal challenges, those life transitions that happen, we got to have the right strategies, tools, and we're here today to give you some practical, good advice about that. Transitions can involve divorce, health challenge, loss of a loved one, moving, uh, children leaving home, that empty nest, taking care of elderly uh, folk that you love, but now need your care. And so transitions fall into those groups of personal or age related or career related, like when you're looking for that big job and you get it, or you want that great job and you don't get it. So all of those things go on in our lives, yet we need to still be that person of influence and impact in our various leadership roles. So we're going to talk about that today, navigating those transitions. And I am just delighted that my guest, because I'm not going to talk about it by myself, I'm going to bring in an expert so we can have a conversation. Someone who's been a registered nurse for more than 20 years and in the health care profession for more than 30, who's dedicated to ensuring that clients and their family members receive the best possible care, but also is a certified executive coach and who partners with healthcare executives, leaders, and organizations to promote positive outcomes, and is also, she's real credentialed. She got a doctor of administration, and she's a fellow in the American College of Healthcare Executives and a board certified leader, Dr. Trinette Pierre. And I want to say hello to you and welcome. And I'm so delighted that you're here with us from Texas.
Good morning. Thank you so much. And I'm so honored to be here with you, Dr. Geneva. You're one of the people I love to death. And thank you for your leadership and how you lead women who are in life's transitions to greater goals that they have for themselves. And you've been influential to me. So thank you for having me this morning.
It's my pleasure. We've been having our conversations back and forth for now, I think it's been a couple of years. And we
Yes, ma'am.
met on LinkedIn, and then we met virtually. We had some good conversations, and we've been connected ever since. And it occurred to me that Dr. Trin is such an expert in several areas, but particularly this area of transitions. I said, I need to bring on, we need to have a girlfriend conversation about this. And so that's what we want to do today. And we really want to consider those questions that so many of you have written in about or commented about. And so I want to start off with asking you, Dr. Trin, how do you approach unexpected life transitions, and what strategies have you found most helpful?
Thank you, Dr. Geneva. And one of the things that I have learned, albeit recently, is not to run from the transition. Transitions are
Um,
all around us, they are inevitable. We don't like change. We're human beings who like things to be static, right? But when transition comes, it doesn't knock on our door, send us a text asking if it's okay to come in. It kicks the door down and
mhm,
barges in, regardless of who we are. They have no respect. Transitions do not respect our bank accounts, our political affiliations, whether or not we have education or degrees or credentials behind our name. Transition comes to every person in all phases of life. 20 to 21 is a transition. Going from high school to college is a transition. Going into the workforce for the first time, leaving the workforce, all of these are transitions. So, one of the things that I have learned to do recently, and I'm talking Dr. Geneva in 2023, 2024,
okay.
recently, I've learned to embrace the transition, not to run
Mhm,
from it. Many
mhm,
times there are difficult transitions in life. I know a lot of people around me and me myself have lost some of our parents, have lost children, things that are
mhm,
horrible situations. But even in those moments, after we learn not to run from it, I would say learn to be open about how we're feeling in the moment. That
mhm,
means being transparent. And I know you're constantly speaking about this, Dr. Geneva. Get a great support group around us, those we can trust to be there for us and with us in the moment, and be open about how we're feeling during those transition periods.
mhm,
Why is
mhm,
that important? Number one, because I believe that support system either helps us to positively navigate and successfully navigate that transition, or we get stuck. And it
mhm.
also helps us to relate to others who may be going through the same things. So
Yes.
we want to make sure, first of all, we don't run from it, we deal with it because it's not going away just because we run in the opposite direction. Second, get a great support system around us. That is key and integral to successfully navigating these transitions that come to every one of our doors. I would
Mhm,
also say for those who are going through difficult transitions, learn to torment what's tormenting you. What do I mean by that? And this is a lesson I had to learn. Whatever it is, whatever that transition may be, do something in that realm to help benefit others. Why do I say this? Because sometimes for me personally, it takes the focus off of me and the glare off of my situation at the time and allows me to help someone else to successfully get
mhm,
through
mhm,
what they're dealing with. Case in
mhm,
point, a lot of people, again, in my circle, are transitioning where we're now taking care of our parents who have always been there to take care of us throughout our lives. Now, our
mhm.
parents are 70s, 80s, early 90s, and we are now the primary caregivers. But in those moments, I went from being a woe is me and I can't believe this is going on and this is hard, this is difficult, to finding others in my circle, those who have been placed in my realm to help them transition. I taught them some of the lessons I have learned. And in those moments, I put what I'm dealing with on the back burner for a moment, even if for a moment
Mhm.
it helps. And I'm able to
Right.
successfully help other people and listen to what they're going through and help them transition as well.
Yeah,
Lastly, I would
that
say
go ahead.
lastly, I would say to give ourselves grace in the moment. There are
Mm,
days
mhm,
when I wake up and I'm like, I can't do this today. I don't feel like doing this. I want to stay in the bed. And I have about 2 minutes of self pity
mhm.
before I realize it's time to get up and get moving. But be gracious with ourselves in those moments or of reverting back to woe is me. right?
Mhm.
Woe is me. I'm going from working and being a powered executive to retired. And now I feel like I've
Mhm.
lost my purpose. Woe is me. And then we get over it and we revert back to the previous step of torment, what's
Mhm.
tormenting us in the moment. So
Mhm.
those are some of the things that I've learned that have helped me recently deal with a lot of the transitions that I'm going through and those in my circle are dealing with.
Mhm. Yeah, those are real gems. I particularly like the notion of not running from a transition, that we need to sit in the emotion and label
Mm,
it. I remember when
absolutely.
I lost my husband and I had just started my business, just trying to get it off the ground. And of course, I could easily see the emotion of sadness and grief. But there were other emotions that I had to dig deep and discover and name, like I felt guilty. I felt
Mm,
guilty that he was gone and I was still here, but I felt guilty. Was there anything I could have done in terms of forcing him to eat more healthy? And don't drink that bottle of wine, or things that I could have done. So I had to label that emotion. I was feeling guilty and I was also feeling angry. And I had to name that. And I was angry because I felt he left me when he wasn't here. But the whole idea of being able to identify, as you're saying, don't run from it, identify it, label it, and sit with it, I think is so important. Another thing you mentioned about support. So, can you say a little more about the importance of a support network in trying to come back, bounce back from a setback?
absolutely. And support, I believe, in my own world has oftentimes been underrated. As someone who
Okay.
has been a healthcare leader and a leader in the education sector, many times people see leaders as people who can do it all on their own without having
Mhm.
the support network. Why? Because they're leaders, they're strong, they can handle it. And a lot of that is internalized. So when we can't shut it off, right? There are many times when we cannot shut that off, even when we're in personal realms. We're still seen as this person who's the strongest. So they never cry, they never break
Mhm.
down. They're the ones
Mhm.
we go to so we can lean on their shoulders and cry. And I learned again recently that's just absolutely not the case. It's okay to be vulnerable and to be open and transparent in those moments with a great support network behind us. The reason I say that is because I've done it by myself. I've sat in a room by myself and I'm like, I'm just going to shout it out, me and the Lord. We're going to handle it on our own. And I was told in those very moments, I put you there in community with others for a reason. There's something that other human beings going through life's experience with you can give you right now in this moment. So it's so important to have people who we can rely on, trusted allies, not just anybody. Don't just grab anybody and tell them all your business, but trusted allies who can be there, who can listen. They may not always say exactly what we feel they should say, because if they're true trusted allies and friends, they're going to bring truth right in those
Mhm.
moments.
Mhm.
After they've done all their listening, they're going to present fact and truth out of love, not out of spite, not trying to hurt your feelings, but out of love. But in those moments, having someone there, another human being that you are in communion with, to share your feelings and be open with actually helps. It helps to be able to verbalize something that is only internal to you. Everybody else doesn't know what you're going through if you keep it internalized. But when we get to the point of verbalizing to others, it takes a load off of me,
Right.
definitely. I feel a release because it's all
Right.
bottled up inside, but it's something about speaking it aloud to another person
Mhm.
who's a shoulder, who's someone who's there to support us in kindness and love.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, I couldn't agree more with that. I really find as one of the most important ways to bounce back from a setback and reinvent yourself is to be vulnerable and authentic for the reasons, as you say, that clearly takes a lot of the stress off of you. And then it also brings a sense of personal empowerment that I was brave enough, courageous enough. I know that's the way I looked at it. I and still look at it that I was brave enough to go on and speak it and say what it is and ask for help. And doing that, speaking it, asking for help, felt good about myself, like I had some power. Let's talk a little bit about the mindset, what our mind is saying, that talk that goes on in our head. And when we're trying to bounce back from these setbacks and create something new and different, what are some of the mindset pitfalls that we as women find ourselves in? And how can we either avoid them or once we're in it, stuck in it, how can we get out?
I think the first one is this is not a transition, but this is the new normal, right? As in, this is what it's always going to be. You're always going to feel like this. You're always going to feel lonely. You're always going to feel overwhelmed with grief. You're always going to feel like you're not enough when you're moving from one role into another. It's the always mindset, I call it. And I felt it in myself. I felt it during times of transitioning, which were in dire circumstances, these transitions of it's always going to be like this, starting my business as an entrepreneur.
Dr.
I'm
Quinn, let me ask you, what did
yes,
you call it? I missed it.
it is the always mindset is what I call it
Always.
when I'm
Got
dealing with
it.
it.
Okay. Hmm.
Yes. Instead of us looking at it as a transition, what do transitions do? They transition in, they transition out. They keep moving. Transitions are fluent, even though some of the effects of transitions may remain. If we lose a loved one, the effects of that will remain. Even though we may deal with grief and be able to deal with it in a different manner, the way I felt on January 1st, 2017, when my father passed, I dealt with it differently then as I do now, but it was a transitional period for me, for my emotions in that moment dealing with grief. The
Hmm.
same is true as I started my business, full time business, 2 years ago. I left the healthcare sector and became an executive coach. And in that moment, all I could think of was it's always going to be slow. It's
Hmm.
always going to be difficult standing in front of groups and networking and getting people to notice what I'm doing and think of the benefit behind my words, right? But in those moments, I had to silence those voices, and I'm learning still to do that. Get out of the always mode. It's not a always, it's a right
Okay.
now. And right now,
Hmm.
in this moment, what can I do to learn and progress myself? And that is one of the things that I have looked for in that mindset. Think of it as a growth moment instead of a woe is me, this is always going to be how it is from now on. Excuse
Hmm.
me. We're going to move forward and we're going to transition with this transition, but we're going to come out better at the end of it, regardless of what the transition is. We're going to resolve to be better at the end of this time. We look at it as a change moment, as a catalyst to propel us forward, as a catalyst to torment what's tormenting us in the form of helping other people get through it and using our testimony and what we have learned in those moments to pass on to others. And at that time, it goes from being an L of a loss to a L of a lesson. We've now changed
Hmm.
and we can use it to empower others who come behind us. So that mindset is very powerful. Don't think this is always the way it's going to be. Think this is going to transition me into the next.
I love that. The L's, loss to lesson.
Yes,
Yes,
ma'am.
I love it. I love it. See, I knew you were going to come on and drop them gems. And I think it's so insightful because as we think about a transition, there's two sides of it. We're going to something new means that we've left something. So there's always a loss. If it's for the person who moves from one city to the next, you've lost the home that you were in. You're no longer with those friends and whoever was in the neighborhood. You don't have the same house. All of that is a loss, a disconnect, something that won't be. And you're going to something new. And it's something different, something new that you can be very excited about it, but there's still that measure of that reality of loss. It's like when you're working and you've worked so long at a job with a colleague who you've developed this wonderful relationship, and she get another job. Now you're happy for her and you're glad about it and all of that, but that's a loss too. Things won't be the same anymore. You won't see her. You won't be able to kick it with her and share ideas and do innovation together. Uh, there's always that any change has the end of something old or what was and the beginning of something new and what will be. And it's that part in the middle that you're talking about.
Absolutely.
In the middle. That's where you need to have that mindset of it's not always going to be like this. It will get better. It might take a while, but we're going to get better.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And even in those lost moments, even in my friend is picking up and moving to another state, I even use that as a lesson. She was a phenomenal friend, but life changes. People transition into their next realm. And it's okay. Yes, we'll miss her. We'll keep in touch sometimes. Sometimes life happens and we lose contact with those individuals. But even then, what lessons did I gain from that relationship? I was able to be open and vulnerable with that person. And even though I knew change is inevitable, she had to move with her family. Guess what? I learned the lesson of having a great friend in that moment. So even in the midst of those hard losses, I look at my dad passing and all I could see is, oh, wow, things have changed drastically. My mom is moving from Atlanta to move in with me, and she's gone through serious years of grief. Thank God she's doing better now. But in those moments, I was like, what can I learn from this? Be grateful for the journey I had and for the lessons learned from my parents. And also keep those who you love close to you now. Show them now that you love them. So
Yes.
lesson even came from that horrible moment of grief. And again, I think it's all the mindset. We can take anything and say, hey, what can I learn from this? And how can I use it to grow and develop myself?
I wanted to ask you, we've talked about don't run from the transition and give ourselves grace during this middle part of the transition to get away from the always mindset that things will change. So once you're starting to move through that transition, how do you sustain it? How do you sustain whatever growth or development or new mindset that you may have acquired once you've learned some lessons and you've turned and you see yourself as I'm reinventing, I'm stepping into a different life? How do you sustain that?
One of the tools that I use frequently is self reflection. At the end of
Mm,
each day, and it's not that I know a lot of people love to journal, sit down and write down your thoughts about
uh-huh.
how you've progressed in that area. Write them down. I'm one who likes to speak aloud. I'll sit and just meditate and be in a quiet zone. And I speak to some of the things that I saw in myself that day. Am I
Mm,
sustaining what I put in place for myself? Versus, do I really need to do much better than I did today when tomorrow comes? So, a lot
mhm,
of the sustainability and moving forward and making sure that one foot constantly steps in front of the other in a forward motion is reflecting on what I did in this footstep. How did I step today?
okay.
And
Mhm,
again, it comes with grace. Give yourself grace if you did not do as well as you thought you should have. Guess what?
mhm,
The next minute you can do better. You don't have to wait till tomorrow. Do better in the next moment. And you can see that progression sustained as you move into the new me. And this is what I'm doing. And I'm transitioning and I'm growing in this moment.
mhm. Wonderful, wonderful. So listen, what final piece of best advice do you have to give to those who are reinventing, looking to reinvent themselves after a major change? You've given us so much good insight. What's your best piece of advice do you want to make sure that people leave with, if nothing else?
Hmm. I would say, as Stephen Covey did, begin with the end in mind. What do you want to see in yourself a year from now, 5 years from now? Unfortunately, many of us will get to the point where we're taking our last breath, right? On that day, what is it that you want to look back and say, hey, this is who I was? This is the
Mhm,
lesson I learned. This is who I grew to be. And work towards that. Don't set these big, audacious, crazy goals that we sometimes in Western culture think is the way to go. But start small and work on this month, and then work on this next year, and work on that in the next 5 years, and eventually build up to the person that you see. If you closed your eyes and said, who's the best me I could be? What are the best
mm,
outcomes for my life? Think about that, then write it down and say, okay, this is what I need to do to get there. It's a strategic plan of sorts for your personal life. I don't believe
mm,
it's just allocated to business, it should be in your personal life as well. So
mhm,
I would give that advice to everyone listening. Make sure that you look at who you want to be and then work backwards from there and reach that goal. Sustain it every day by doing those self reflective moments, and by this time next year, you could be a changed person for the better. You can be that much closer to being the person you want to be.
I love it. Dr. Trin, how can people get in touch with you?
They can reach out to me on my website, www.tremaniconsulting.com.
Fantastic. All the way from Texas. I love it. I love it. Dr. Trinette Pierre, thank you so much for gracing us, not only with your presence, but the insights, the gems, the real deal techniques and tools to help those who are looking to reinvent themselves, to come to their next after a major change in their lives. Appreciate you.
Thank you so much. And it was a blessing to be here. Thank you.
Mwah. Love you. We'll talk again soon. Dr. Trin, I love the real deal insights that she left with us. She talked about don't run from transition. And we explored labeling, identifying the emotions that you're feeling, giving them names, sitting with them, the mindfulness, being aware of the emotions that you're feeling. Because one thing we know for sure, right? That any transition, no matter what it is, joyful or sad, comes with emotions. And so being able to manage our emotions, regulate our emotions, understand our emotions. When I talk about embrace the change, that's really what I'm talking about. identifying and naming your emotions, and then sitting with those emotions. So they're not controlling you, but you're understanding them. I loved her conversation about give yourself grace. Oftentimes, we beat up ourselves worse than anybody else can when we're going through these changes. Be as empathetic as we are, probably to a whole lot of people. Treat ourselves like our own best friend. If your best friend came up to you and had a problem or what have you, be all ears, all sympathy, listen, giving yourself grace. Turn that back to yourself. Leaders having to have all of the answers all the time and be that strong, stoic person. We need to forget that because we're not 100% all the time strong. We just aren't. We have vulnerabilities, we have fears, we have anxieties, we have stuff going on at home. So having the strength and grace to be vulnerable and authentic when needed. Don't tell all your business, okay? You could do it in very professional ways if you're in leadership roles. As you're working through your transition, as you're going through that reinvention process. The support network, again, is so critical to have. This whole conversation with Dr. Trin about mindset and how we think about things. She talked about the always mindset. It's not always going to be this way, but we be in that mindset that we always going to feel lonely because our children have left. That and I really did not. Let me just tell you on that one. That would be one that I disagree with because I did not feel always that my children left. And I love my kids. My kids are cool. They cool. But when they got out of the house and out of my pocketbook, I was happy. Okay. But many transitions, we say to ourselves, it's always going to be this way. I know I felt at a time that I was always going to feel lonely after my husband passed. It's not true. It just isn't. There comes a time where you do feel different. Yes, in every loss, there's a lesson. That self reflection, talking to ourselves, journaling, stepping into ourselves again, giving empathy, this whole idea of the end, visualizing that end. That's where you want to be, where you want to get to. What do you want to look like? What that future self is, that future self that's aligned with purpose and your feeling and where you're brilliant and imperfect at the same time. Visualizing that and then being that. And then the steps that you take, you work back, asking yourself, what do I do? So this has been a lesson in reinvention, but just not reinventing yourself, but reinventing, changing in the midst of change. And the reason I wanted to bring this conversation to you is that for sure, as midlife women, as we grow and blossom and go into our 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, and beyond, the life transitions will be there. They're inevitable, they come. And we also want to continue to live full lives and have influence and impact. And so, if we want that kind of leadership, we have to know how to navigate through these transitions that are inevitable. Comment, let me know what you're thinking. Join, elevate next level success. We have conversations all leading to a vibrant life. See you next time.